Today's webinar, we will learn more about 3 new regional grant opportunities. Altogether, they will be providing $1.75 million in funds to organizations in our region. And these are extremely timely opportunities with a deadline for these grants fast approaching, and these deadlines are between October 10th and 19th, and we encourage you to apply as soon as possible. Now I would like to turn it over to Martha Chaudhry with the City of Kirkland to review their newly launched commercial rent relief grant program. Martha?
Thank you very much, Christina and Anthony. Just organizing my screen here. Yes, thanks very much. The Kirkland's program may sound like a bit of a deja vu to the program that Anthony just outlined for Bellevue, but I'll get to that in 1 second. I just wanted to take one moment to really acknowledge the deep challenges and the impact that the pandemic has had on our business communities and our friends and neighbors, and to honor the resiliency and relentless efforts of our businesses during these crazy times. Programs like the Kirkland Commercial Rent Relief Program are intended to relieve some of the economic pain that everyone has experienced as a result of the pandemic. And they work within the guidelines of the American Rescue Plan Act funds, which are enabling them. So some of the criteria and eligibility requirements that we're having to put in place are a direct result of those federal restrictions. I think it's important to note that. I also want to really thank all of the colleagues that I've had the privilege of working with in pandemic response in the region. Everyone here on this webinar, One Redmond certainly, and Bellevue, and particularly acknowledge the collegial sort of posture of all of these professionals, and sharing information and collaborating, and trying to work out best practices and economies of scale. And the Kirkland Commercial Rent Relief Program is really a direct reflection of that. It's modeled very, very closely on what Bellevue put together. So just wanted to say that. With that said, yes, the Kirkland Commercial Rent Relief Program launched yesterday morning. The website listed on the slide here is where you can go to find out all information and to fill out the very, very brief intake form to register your intent to apply. The program is open for tenants, small business tenants, and nonprofits to apply. It does require cooperation of tenants and landlords, but tenants are the applicant, at least on the intake form. The deadline for the program is October 19th, 2021 at 11:59. So please get your intake form in prior to that time, again, at the website listed. The Kirkland program is funded with an initial tranche of $250,000 from ARPA. And the grants are, grant monies can be used to pay against the small businesses' base rent arrears and utilities that are owed to their landlord. So the use of the grant funds is very specifically for back rent and utilities that are part of back rent or owed directly to the landlord. The size of Kirkland's grants are $1,000 to $10,000, and the broad goals are to help relieve some of the economic hardship caused by COVID-19 for small businesses, and to prevent commercial evictions of small businesses, or at the very least, to delay any of those proceedings. Like I mentioned, it requires the cooperation of tenants and landlords, and the grant payments go directly to the landlord. Next slide, please. I mentioned already what the grant funds can be used for. The time period is March 1st, 2020 through September 30th, 2021. So rent and utilities arrears that occurred due to COVID-19 in that time period. Foregone or forgiven rent and utilities as part of the base rent or owed directly to the landlord are also eligible expenses that the grant monies can be used for. They may not be used to pay for triple net costs, taxes, insurance, maintenance, common area charges, penalties, and interest. Next slide. So tenant eligibility requirements. Tenant applicants must have a current commercial lease with a commercial landlord, between 1 and 25 full-time equivalent employees, less than $3 million in gross revenues in 2019. And as Anthony mentioned, these parameters are set to try and assist our very small businesses and target our limited funding where it's arguably most needed. You must have a current Kirkland business license and documented past due rent. That means the documentation means that that attestation needs to be supported by an account statement or an invoice and co-signed by the landlord. Similarly, a decline in gross revenues year on year of at least the amount of the grant funds that you're requesting. So not a super high barrier, but we need to show declining gross revenues year on year. And later on, there'll be a list of documents that can attest to that. And then importantly, you cannot have received previous funding for those months that you're seeking relief for. In other words, no double dipping. Businesses who apply must be open and intend to remain open. Next slide. Thank you. So the landlord has a couple of agreements that they need to agree to in order to participate in the program. And as mentioned, the landlords do receive the funds directly. Landlords for the Kirkland program must agree not to evict or commence eviction proceedings against a tenant for at least 30 days after receiving the grant funds. They must credit the tenant's account with the full amount of the grant that is received and forgive late fees and penalties for that period which the grant monies cover. And then landlords will need to sign the landlord participation agreement, which essentially asks for these covenants that I just read off and attest to the amount of rent arrears. Next slide. All right, timeline I've gone over a little bit already. Again, the deadline, October 19th. Please do your intake form. It takes probably 30 seconds to fill out on the website listed here. On or after the closing of the intake window, the City of Kirkland will run a randomized lottery in order to sequence intake forms and sequence grant applicants for the compilation of the full application form and payment. So that will take place in October and November. So the process loosely is intake form first, and then we have a community-based partner, the Indian Association of Western Washington, which will be assisting on all grant applications. So all grant forms will be processed through the IAWW. Once the lottery sequences our intake forms, you'll be contacted by the IAWW to help complete your application form and get it back to the city for payment should you be eligible. And then payments will happen on a rolling basis. Once applications are complete and verified, checks will be cut as and when they come in the sequence that the lottery has prescribed. Next slide, please. So the required documentation has been mentioned. I will reiterate what Anthony says. It's not too, go ahead and start gathering these things now. The documentation includes the application form, your commercial lease, your UBI number, documentation of back rent, so an invoice or a tenant statement, proof that the business is open, and then importantly, the proof of revenue loss year on year. So that's going to be your 2019 and 20 annual tax returns, or the Washington DOR tax reports from Q2 2020 and 2021. So that documentation, may be the most sort of time consuming to come up with. So go ahead and start that process now. The landlord will need to sign the agreement and provide the W-9. Next slide, please. Step-by-step instructions, review the eligibility guidelines on the website, complete the intake form, notify your landlord that you intend to apply because they will need to co-sign the application. Notify the IAWW if you need language assistance. collect all your required documentation and work with IAWW staff to complete and submit the application. And then you will receive notice of the grant monies received by your landlord and the credit to your tenant account once the payment has been made. Next slide. So the last slide is resources, and again, the portal where you can complete the intake form. Applicants can complete the intake form and begin that application process. Questions, please contact business support at kirklandwa.gov or call this number. Both of those lead to me, so I will attempt to get back to you as soon as possible. We also work with Restartup 425's business response team. They can be contacted at this website at restartup425.org, the technical assistance request button, or at this number. They can help with questions about the program and help you understand documentation and those kinds of things. And then the application, technical, and language assistance is provided by the Indian Association of Western Washington at this email address and this phone number during business hours. I think everyone will have access to these contacts later after the webinar, so I will close it there.
And I want to make sure you bookmark this site, oneeastside.org/spark. There you're going to find key resources, information on our one-on-one advising, our weekly webinars, grant opportunities as these become available. So all the stuff you heard here today will be up on that website or that portal as well. All right, I want to say a big thank you to all of you for participating today. We know you're all very busy, and thank you to all those who are listening later. All right, until we see you again, this concludes our webinar for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina.
Yep,
Thank
sure
you.
thing.